China vs Japan. Which one has the better economy? Japan and China are two of the biggest economies in the world. Japan is the third largest economy with a GDP of $4.9 trillion, while China is the second largest economy with a GDP of $27.3 trillion. However, GDP is not everything. While China does have a larger economy, Japan has a higher GDP per capita of $38,000 compared to China's $20,000. This means that on average, each person in Japan makes more money than each person in China. But which country really has the better economy? Let's find out. We will be judging these countries based on these 10 factors. Each of these factors will be rated from 1 to 10, with 10 being the best. The factors are as follows. Factor number 1, GDP. Factor number 2, GDP per capita. Factor number 3, unemployment rate. Factor number 4, poverty rate. Factor number 5, industrial output. Factor number 6, inflation. Factor number 7, government debt. Factor number 8, foreign investment. Factor number 9, technological capability. And finally, factor number 10, military expenditure. Alright, let's get started. Factor no. 1, GDP. As we all know, GDP stands for Gross Domestic Product. It is the total monetary value of everything a country produces and sells on the market. When it comes to GDP, size does matter. A bigger economy can support more jobs, produce more innovation, and make people richer. China wins this factor because they have a higher GDP than Japan. Japan has a GDP of $4.9 trillion, but China has a GDP of $27.3 trillion. So China gets 10 points, Japan gets 9 points. Factor no. 2, GDP per capita. GDP per capita is the average economic output per person in a country. This is a good indicator for the standard of living in a country. The higher the GDP per capita, the wealthier the people are in that country. Japan wins this factor because they have a higher GDP per capita than China. The GDP per capita of China is $20,000, but the GDP per capita of Japan is $38,000. So Japan gets 10 points, China gets 9 points. Factor no. 3, unemployment rate. Unemployment rate is the percentage of the labor force that is unemployed and actively seeking employment. A low unemployment rate is desirable because it shows that people who want to work can find a job. People without jobs are not able to contribute to the economy, and they may end up needing some sort of government assistance. That being said, an unemployment rate that is too low can mean that employers are forced to raise wages, which can lead to inflation. Japan wins this factor because their unemployment rate is lower than that of China. The unemployment rate of China is 5.3%, but the unemployment rate of Japan is only 2.5%. So Japan gets 10 points, China gets 9 points. Factor no. 4, poverty rate. The poverty rate is the percentage of the population that lives below the national poverty line. In other words, it is the percentage of people who do not have enough money to meet their basic needs. Poverty can lead to all sorts of social problems, such as crime, poor health, and reduced life expectancy. It is also a major cause of inequality. Both Japan and China have made great strides in reducing poverty over the past few decades. However, there is still a long way to go. Japan has a poverty rate of 14.4%, and China has a poverty rate of 0.5%. So Japan gets 6 points, China gets 10 points. Factor no. 5, industrial output. Industrial output is the value of all goods produced by the manufacturing, mining, and construction sectors. These sectors are important because they produce the goods that we use every day. They also employ a large percentage of the population. Japan wins this factor because they have a higher industrial output than China. The industrial output of China is $35.5 trillion. But the industrial output of Japan is $45.7 trillion. So Japan gets 10 points, China gets 9 points. Factor no. 6. Inflation. Inflation is the rate at which prices increase over time. High inflation can erode the value of savings and make it difficult for businesses to plan for the future. It can also lead to higher interest rates and unemployment. Moderate inflation, on the other hand, is seen as a sign of a healthy economy. Both countries try to keep inflation at a low level, ideally around 2%. Japan wins this factor because they have a lower inflation rate than China. The inflation rate of China is 3.9%, but the inflation rate of Japan is only 0.5%. So Japan gets 10 points, China gets 9 points. Factor no. 7. Government debt. Government debt is the total amount of money owed by the government. High levels of debt can be a sign of a troubled economy, as it can indicate that the government is spending more money than it is taking in. This can lead to higher taxes or reduced government services. However, government debt can also be beneficial if it is used to invest in things like infrastructure. Japan wins this factor because they have a lower government debt than China. The government debt of China is 29.7% of their GDP, but the government debt of Japan is 60.7% of their GDP. I know what you're thinking. How can Japan have a lower score when they have a higher percentage? Well, although Japan has a higher percentage, it's not that bad. In fact, most developed countries have a government debt to GDP ratio above 60. So Japan actually has a pretty good government debt to GDP ratio. Also, Japan has the third highest nominal government debt in the world with $2.45 trillion. The only countries ahead of them are the United States and China. However, if you look at it as a percentage of GDP, Japan is actually in the top 20. China would be number 3 on the list with a government debt to GDP ratio of 29.7. So for this factor, I'm gonna give both countries 7 points. Factor no. 8. Foreign investment. Foreign investment is money that comes from outside the country. It can be in the form of direct investment, such as when a company builds a factory in another country, or it can be in the form of portfolio investment, such as when an investor buys shares in a foreign company. Foreign investment is important for a country's economy because it can provide a boost of capital that can be used to invest in things like new factories or new technology. It can also create jobs and increase exports. Japan wins this factor because they receive more foreign investment than China. China receives $140 billion in foreign investment, but Japan receives $650 billion in foreign investment. So Japan gets 10 points, China gets 9 points. Factor no. 9. Technological capability. Technological capability is a country's ability to produce and use new technologies. It is important for a country's economy because it can lead to increased productivity, which can result in higher economic growth. It can also help a country to compete in the global economy. Both Japan and China are major players in the global economy, and they are constantly trying to develop new technologies to stay ahead of the competition. However, Japan has a slight edge over China when it comes to technological capability. Japan is home to some of the world's most innovative companies, such as Toyota, Sony, and Panasonic. China, on the other hand, is home to companies like Huawei and ZTE, which are known for producing cheaper products. Overall, Japan has a more advanced and sophisticated technological sector than China. So Japan gets 10 points, China gets 9 points. Factor number 10. Military expenditure. Military expenditure is the amount of money a country spends on its military. Some people believe that high military expenditures are necessary to protect a country from external threats. Others believe that military spending is a waste of money and that the money would be better spent on things like education or health care. There is no right answer when it comes to military spending, and it is a decision that every country has to make for itself. However, it is important to strike a balance between spending enough to protect the country and not spending so much that it hurts the economy. Both Japan and China spend a significant amount of money on their militaries. However, when it comes to military spending as a percentage of GDP, Japan spends significantly more than China. Japan spends 1% of their GDP on their military, while China spends only 0.4% of their GDP on their military. So I'm going to give Japan 10 points and China 9 points. Alright, let's now calculate the scores. In order to get the total score, we just have to add up all the points. Japan got 90 points and China got 89 points. So which one has the better economy? Well, it's pretty close, but Japan has the better economy. Even though China has a higher GDP, Japan has a higher GDP per capita, lower unemployment, lower inflation, and they receive more foreign investment. Although China does have a lower poverty rate, which is definitely something to celebrate, it's not enough to give them the win. What did you think of the results? Did you think that Japan would win? Let us know your thoughts. Also, which country do you think has the better economy? Make sure to leave a comment down below. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up. Thanks for watching.